And Clint, you're doing something a little bit different for us today, and that is trying to help explain what the Russians are up to. What is this military strategy, and how has it changed over the last week?
That's right, Chuck. We've heard a lot about Russian failures and difficulties, but overnight, we're really seeing what happens when Russia has successes. What we see here is a map of the South. Remember, in 2014, the Russians took Crimea, and the one axis of advance that they've had into Ukraine has been from the south, where they've been successful. Right now, you see forces that have broken through, are on this axis here, running along the coast of the Sea of Azov. They are now laying siege to Mariupol in such a way that it will be absolutely devastating in the coming days. We're talking large indirect fires, artillery, missiles, munitions. They are devastating this town. Total warfare. Separately, you started off, Chuck, talking about Kherson. Kherson is important because it is the land bridge. It's the essential bridge that connects Crimea to the rest of Ukraine over the Dnieper River. Kherson, if once taken, allows them to advance forces all the way out to the east. And if they are successful, if they can make this land bridge, they can then pursue all the way to the Moldovan border, essentially cutting off that small sliver that you see down there in the southwest and eliminating possibility for Ukraine to really be supplied by sea. This would just cut off the entire southern area and would create a land bridge to their forces out here in the east. Now, separately, Chuck, with that, we still need to be talking about what's going on in Kyiv. You brought up logistics, and President Zelensky mentioned it as well. The battle from here on out is really about three things: food, fuel, and ammunition. Those three things are what keep armies alive. And a big topic of conversation has been this enormous convoy that we've seen here in Ukraine. This convoy, hopefully I can get it to pull up here. The board's moving about the same speed as the convoy at the moment. But this convoy is not what we would typically see. As an infantry officer, when I was talked about Soviet or Russian forces, they are stacked up. This is a traffic jam right here. That is indication they're not worried about air power.
I was just going to say, they look like a sitting duck.
They are, Chuck. And that really tells you about why you're hearing President Zelensky say, hey, what about a no-fly zone? What about essentially bringing in some air power? There are some reports that the Ukrainians have hit part of this convoy. This is essential for the logjam to be broken for the Russian military going into Kyiv. This is also not a disciplined military force. This isn't the vaunted Russian armored divisions that we were really told about leading up to the invasion. They're sloppy, they're bogged down, and they're going to struggle in terms of their advance. Now, with that, one thing to think about is when you look at the broader map in terms of Kyiv, what they have been able to do is start to advance in other areas. You see massive shelling here in Chernihiv. Chernihiv is not a major strategic important point except for one thing. This is the rear area, essentially, of that advancing force. They were sloppy, they were bold, and they got caught trying to go in the first week. In this new period, what you're seeing them do is build that lodgehead, build that combat power so that they can sustain the siege of Kyiv. And what we're seeing in Mariupol starting right now, that should foreshadow what we might see in Kyiv as they build up combat force. It can be devastating, and just a little bit of air power would make a huge difference.
So we're going to slowly, assuming nobody else intervenes, is the Russian strategy is a very slow choking off of Kyiv? And is that what we're going to be watching? It's like a slow motion car wreck. We're going to just watch this slow advance from the south, the east, and the north, with really only the west being perhaps a way to get supply lines to Ukrainian soldiers in Kyiv?
Absolutely.
Is that what we're looking at here?
Yeah, they're going to lay siege to Kyiv in hopes that they will topple the government. The initial plan was crazy from one perspective with the Russians, but it depended on toppling the regime in Kyiv. Remember, they were trying to do a political coup, essentially knock out Zelensky and his administration, take over the country. Now, how are they going to do that? They're going to lay siege. Critical to watch here is once they start to envelop here to the west. Hopefully I can get this going.
Yeah.
When they envelop here to the west, they will be cutting those supply lines that we've been hearing about coming in through Poland. So we're hearing humanitarian aid, lethal aid, the reports today of 2,000 Stinger missiles. How are they going to get there? If they're cut off here in the south and they're cut off in the west, Zelensky will have to really think about what his options are in terms of keeping his force going over time.
Clint, can you imagine aid being flown in by, say, Polish forces that NATO sort of protected as they weigh in, or do you think we wouldn't want to risk, NATO would be uncomfortable risking that?
I think NATO is totally uncomfortable due to the nuclear option. That's really, Putin's got 3 cards he plays against the West: nuclear, cyber, and disinformation. That's essentially his asymmetric tools. He will threaten immediately if he sees any NATO forces, and you've heard President Biden and many other leaders say that. But I'm worried about another hypothetical. Let's say it's 30 days, the resupply is still going, they still don't have Kyiv. We should be worrying about out here. Right now, when you look at the border area, we've got refugees going out, but soon we're going to see resupply trains coming in. And there's this other issue that's there. President Zelensky called for foreign fighters. If foreign fighters start showing up, if they start flowing into the country, Russia will want to go after that combat power as well. Yeah. I would think that the Russian forces, while they're focused here, if they get bogged down, they're going to try and move their forces and fires out towards the west.
Clint, bottom line, this no longer looks like a fast operation that the Russians are planning on. This is now a long siege. Is that how you would assess this?
Not only a long siege, but Putin's got trouble at home, Chuck. You're starting to see a lot of panic at home. I'm worried about what if Putin is losing in 30 days. What does he do at home? What is he doing in Ukraine? I think all his options are on the table. We've heard of executions, assassinations, and nuclear threats. I'm worried this really turns into a very dangerous situation in the coming weeks.